Hello everybody, welcome back to Shannon's Shelf. My name's Shannon, this is The Shelf. Today I'm going to be doing my first video of pretty much what I'm planning on doing for the next while, the time being with this channel, and that is reading perhaps a favorite book, or at least like a super influential book to a lot of people that are super influential in my life. And I wanted to start with perhaps the most influential, or at least the most important person in my life presently, and has been for the last over 6 years. That is the last over 6 years that we have been married. That is my wife, of course. I probably put that in the title of the video. But my wife, her name is Stephanie. She's actually been on my channel before, I think just once. But she has been around. She reads perhaps more than I do. We don't usually read the same type of stuff, but she is a good reader too, and better writer than me, better person, and yeah, she's great to have around. A little bit of background about her, I suppose, especially as it relates to the book that she had me read. So Steph grew up in southern Utah, but she didn't live there for crazy long, because she actually, I guess in many ways would be described as a Navy brat. Her parents were both in the Navy actually, but her dad made a career out of the Navy, and so she moved around quite a bit. She's lived in several states throughout the United States, lived overseas a couple of times, including England and Italy. Italy would probably be her favorite place from my understanding. Hopefully one day she'll get to show me around Sicily, where she lived. But either way, that environment is what she grew up with. A dad who was, not that this is always the case in the Navy, but at least with his line of work in the Navy, he was gone quite a lot and had a relatively dangerous job. And it's stressful for a young girl, a girl who's growing up, at the very least, and it makes a big impact on who she is as a woman and as a person. But I would say it's someone who cares for her father, but also is just sensitive to other people in general, and a great spouse, and a perhaps even better mother to our children. But either way, she will be joining us right about now.
You make me sound like I'm a nice person or something.
I think you're a nice person. Yeah, so this is Stephanie, and the book that she had me read was 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I perhaps should have double-checked my pronunciations for all these names, these Afghani names, but I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce some of them, so apologies. But this is the same author who wrote The Kite Runner. He's only written about 3 books. He's an Afghani American. He's lived in the United States for quite some time, since 1980. He came from a relatively privileged, diplomatic background. His father was, so they were capable of moving to the United States, thankfully, when they needed to. But the book itself is great, put simply, but it's described as pretty much 30 years of Afghanistan history, and it gives us that history through the lens of 2 women, pretty much, which is an interesting device, especially in this society, in many ways throughout all 30 years of its history that it's covering, but more so in some of the different periods, especially under the Taliban. Women are second-class citizens at best, pretty much.
Kind of treated as dogs quite often, or as at least as conveniences. And I'm sorry.
Maybe you guys think it might be distracting for others.
No, okay, but I don't know how to best put it, but kind of to be shunned and put aside and kept hidden. But then you get families in there that genuinely care about their families, their daughters, and want to help them and be able to further their education and things. But then you get the more, is tribal a good enough word for it, or else the more extreme on the end of the spectrum, where they really just are objects to be used.
Yeah, definitely a heavy sense that women are pretty much good for breeding, good to have children, and if they can't do that, then there's not really much use for them. It was interesting. I mean, you used the word tribal, which I think is perhaps a good way to describe lots of the cultural outlook for lots of Afghanistan from how it is described. The perhaps best exception to that would be Kabul. I don't know how they say it actually. I've heard it before. I actually finished the book over a week ago now, so perhaps that was my mistake. But either way, yeah, tribal I think is a great word. Gives an idea, but also just how, I mean, you mentioned that it kind of just varied on the household, like on the family. And in many ways, that just sounds like any culture. That sounds like American culture today, too. Like, where one house can be a happy, like, respecting, like, egalitarian, like, loving household.
Love in the home, and it directs their relationships.
Right. But then next door could be the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Is perhaps less culturally acceptable in places like the West, where it's, more of the exception as opposed to Afghanistan. Sounds like it might be more of the rule.
Norm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like here it's more hidden away, whereas even if it is, even if you were to live in a community where it's like half and half, or even predominantly loving or something, that like on your street it's predominantly a loving place, they're still very open about when they have, I would call it dysfunction and abuse. But they're just very open about that. They'll openly beat their wife or their insubordinate child or something. But
yeah.
But I don't know. Well, I'll let you direct the conversation.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that I knew that it was a dangerous place growing up, just from what I'd heard of the conversations, and I wasn't exactly super little when my dad first went on deployment, but I knew it was a dangerous place, and anytime that it was really talked about by any of the adults, it was always scary and just dangerous and backwards. Like, it was not a place that I ever wanted my dad to go to, but my dad would also tell us stories about like the other side, where it's not just this extreme hateful place where every single person just wants to essentially either rape a woman or kill her, but it's, I don't know, is that too extreme for this?
The word rape might get flagged by YouTube, but it might not.
Best take it out then, but I don't know how exactly I want to go about that. Just
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to the fact, again, women are second class, essentially. I'm not saying that as a declarative statement, as, they should be. But it's interesting, too, because even, like, the bad guy, or one of the bad guys in the story, Rashid, he is very not nice to his wives. I feel like, so, I don't know if I said, heavy on the spoilers. But there are two main characters, two main women. It's Miriam and Layla. And Miriam is a bastard child from another man who, like, slept with his maid. And so there's a lot of family dynamic stuff here, and I think it's mostly on what not to do. And so he had 3 wives, and he had about 10 legitimate children, but then he had the one illegitimate child who was completely separated and alienated from the rest of her family and treated like scum.
yeah.
And her mother was certainly mentally unwell, which I think exacerbated things quite a bit. but the mother at the same time was kind of watching out for her. Like, she was right in many ways that her father didn't really care, or he cared more about his reputation. I do think he loved her in some way, and there is some sort of closure, I think, that you get from the story. But
too little, too late.
yes, definitely, and just
sorry, Daddy-O.
Yeah, but just like her mom too. Like, although the mother was kind of watching out for her, her mother was also very abusive still, and very much not a good person, I would say. But it gets even worse because Miriam gets married to this guy named Rashid.
Yeah. At 14 years old, she's married off, and he waits about a week before he's like, all right, come on, it's time, and goes into her bed and ignores her saying, please don't, like, wait.
Yeah.
Which, that is something, while it's not, the book is not extremely graphic in that sense, but it is enough that it definitely makes you uncomfortable. And
should say trigger warning, perhaps, because it is very uncomfortable,
very
especially for those
unsettling.
that may have
any kind of sexual
any
abuse
SA,
or
stuff.
Any abuse or assault of that intimate nature. It's a book that might really either make you sick, or you're gonna have to put it down for a while and step away from for a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's what you would like. I don't know if this is necessarily my wife's favorite book. It's just perhaps the most impactful book she's read. She's described it as more of a love-hate relationship with the book, because it is
genuinely
profound,
enjoyed this story. I loved the hidden embers of hope in it, and how you can see how much of a family bond and a mother's love is shown in these two women, like a proper love, and how, like, even when they were in desperate situations and circumstances, and they held on to one another, and that was the hope that they needed to be able to get them through the next day, and also the two children, of course. But then how, when it came down to it, like, there's a pivotal moment where it's like, either we can finally have like light in our life, we can finally break free of this, we can actually have a happy ending, or we can continue doing this. And it wasn't even a decision, it was just a choice for one of them, and it was just,
yeah, there were a couple of moments where it seemed like it might get better, but I'm like, no, the book's still got 100 pages left. He's not gonna do this to us. But eventually, I feel like it does happen at the end. But all the things that it felt like, oh, this could have been good. Like, initially, Miriam actually conceives, and she is very happy about it. Her husband is very happy about it. It's when she constantly miscarries that it just like it was already not a very healthy relationship, but it just gets brutal for her. Very, very abusive. Like,
she's missing most of her teeth within a few short years, just because they've all been, like, knocked out of her head.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly abusive environment for her. I mean, it would almost been, to say that it would have almost been better if she had died is probably not that much of an exaggeration.
Yeah. And
like,
then,
at least if I was in that situation, I would have wanted to die.
Yeah. And then,
because being a mom was something that she was, well, not because she wasn't a mom that she should have died, but it's
it seemed like it was going to be one thing that could have been good for her life.
Like, one thing she was actually
and
holding out hope for.
And that still didn't. It just couldn't happen.
No. So she never was able to carry a baby to term, and eventually, the story pivots over to
another woman,
and we can see from a loving family, her, and she's even going and getting an education, and she even falls in love, and it's like, it's a love that actually is love. It's not the Rashid dynamic of, oh yeah, I love you.
It's consensual.
Yeah, it's and how many spoilers are we going through?
Oh, I don't care. I already told them spoilers, so
Okay.
they're still here. That's on there.
I mean, she conceives a child with this man. Tariq is his name, and she's what, 15, 16?
Yeah, pretty much one night of passion before
Yeah.
his family leaves because they're escaping to Pakistan to escape the political turmoil.
Yeah.
And it's sad because, again, kind of talking about like how there's almost this glimmer of hope for Miriam, and then it's just squashed. And then she has this glimmer of hope because her family finally decides they're going to go to Pakistan as well.
Yeah.
And then
Like bombing
it's completely
happens.
squashed as well.
Yeah.
Her parents are killed.
Yep.
And
now she's left on the streets.
she has nothing.
And eventually, Rashid comes along and he says, well, Tariq is also dead, so... And he's like, oh, I'm going to be so charitable and give you my home the second you get on my bed.
That was some of the most disgusting stuff in the book, to be honest.
It's incredibly... I don't know, for me it was incredibly difficult to get through. Like, I sobbed so much throughout the book, but I wanted to keep reading it because I was like, this has to end better, right? And it was also mandatory for a class because that was a book that I was like, I'll choose this one just because of the like indirect exposure I've had to Afghanistan through my dad. But anyways, so there's a lot of just, it doesn't cushion things. Like the book doesn't cushion things. It just shows their experience. And it's based off of it's based off of actual women. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's a fictional story, but...
It's fictional, but it's loosely based around
it's still inspired on real life.
Yeah.
Really real life. So.
But, anywho, what was it? I lost my train of thought. Chugga.
Well, it's very, very rough, but either way, like, I think there is some bright spots, and it mostly comes because, well, Layla was kind of jumped at the opportunity to marry Rashid in some ways because she had conceived from her actual lover, and she didn't want to, be stoned or completely put out if that had been discovered and not been wed. At some point along the line, Rashid seems to recognize that it's not his child, but he
steps away from the child completely.
No, he's still relatively nice to the girl, actually, surprisingly.
Up until he puts her up for adoption, like he puts her in the orphanage.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So he's still kind of nice to the girl. And either way, the baby girl is still very much a bright spot in the lives of these other women.
Oh, both of them, for
Layla
sure.
And Miriam.
Like,
both
Miriam
adore
essentially
her.
becomes a grandparent. Like,
she's essentially another mother. She's like best friends, pretty much, with Aziza as the girl's
Maybe
name.
I should say aunt, really, because it's more of like that kind of
Yeah.
dynamic. But either way, that she's able to have that joy, that one good part of her day is this little girl. And you finished your thought. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just there was a bright spot. I do think Rashid was like actually kind of had a soft spot towards his own kin, even if it was a girl, his own daughter. That does shift quite heavily when his son is born, and it's actually his. Yeah. It looks like him.
But I mean, the whole thing was, this guy would go to, was it mosque? Is that what it's called, mosque?
Yeah.
Yeah, he would ride his bicycle to the mosque every single day when he thought that whenever Miriam was pregnant, and pray for a boy. Like, that's all that he wanted was a son.
Layla, you mean? Or...
No, with Miriam, he went every single day to the mosque. And then he did the same thing with
when Layla was pregnant.
Layla, yeah. So when the son is finally born, that's his like.
It's everything.
It's his living like angel right there. And so he puts the other girl in an orphanage, and that like breaks their
that
hearts.
Doesn't happen right away though. And it's also good to point out Rashid is very much not a good person, but he is very human. He is a little bit you can kind of feel for him in some regards at the beginning of the story, but not really as past page 50 or something. But that's because he actually had been previously married before Miriam, and his wife had passed away, and he had a son who also died when he was young. And so Zalmai, when his son is born of Layla, it's like it means so much to him, and I understand.
He has his son back, essentially.
Right, and
he has a second chance.
I can get that, but he kind of Zalmay becomes everything. Aziza, I don't think, is completely by the wayside, but she's obviously not as important. And when times get really rough under Taliban rule, Aziza does eventually get put in an orphanage because the orphanage can feed her. And then Layla and Miriam and Zalmay, her brother, Aziza's brother, would go and visit her most days if they could. But
and I mean, I've noticed that Layla, every time she would go by herself, she would get beaten up to the point that she would put on extra clothes just so that she could get beaten up and still go see her daughter.
Yes, because Rashid would not always agree to go because under Taliban rule, all the women had to be accompanied by a male family member, and if they Rashid would often not agree to go just because he's a vindictive, evil man, pretty much. But
recognized that it wasn't his, and he was like, "You're paying for it now."
And so she would go regardless, even if it meant getting beat by, Taliban enforcers.
Which is part of the whole. You can see a mother's love. Like, they're willing to do literally anything, get knocked around just so they can see them for like 10 minutes. But of note too is that Miriam at first hated Layla because she was like, "You're stealing my husband. Like, I have nothing in this world except for my title of I am a married woman. That's it." And then Layla comes along, and she's pretty, she's young.
She's supposed to be like, the belle of the ball. Like,
yeah.
She's gorgeous.
And so it's a real big deal to Miriam, understandably. I couldn't share you, so I mean. But, anyways, up until one night, Layla says no to Rashid, and Rashid busts into Miriam's room and starts hurting her, and it's like, "You did this, you turned her against me." Total Anakin moment there. Sorry. But then Layla convinces him to back off. Like, she's like, "All right, you know what? Come back with me. Leave Miriam alone." And that's when those two, like, their bond completely switches. Like, it's not just you were an invader into my home, but it's I have like a kinship with you now. Like, you did something incredible for me. No one's ever stuck up for me before, and you just did. And that's when they actually have that bond. They look out for each other. And
yeah, they become like sisters.
They become like sisters. Like, Miriam finally has family that loves her.
Yeah. And again, I mentioned earlier that Miriam adores Aziza,
Oh, yeah.
and they're both good to Zalmay, even as Zalmay is like, worships his father.
Oh yeah, and is very much like his father,
but he's a boy.
Yeah,
He's young.
but it's I mean, if left in that current course, nothing altered. They were in that same family dynamic the rest of their days. He would become exactly like his dad.
Yeah, unfortunately, but I mean, he was being trained too.
Exactly, that's what he was raised with. That was how men behaved in that household and around that household, like what they were surrounded with.
Right.
Yeah.
But the story, it kind of takes a turn when we find out Tariq, Layla's actual lover, and
is alive. Like, he literally knocks on their door, and she's like, "Ah!" And she's so embarrassed. Layla is so embarrassed because she's like missing all of her teeth.
She's missing some of her teeth, and she's not.
Sorry.
The hard years of living in an abusive home has dampened her beauty, but they allow her to talk. It's mostly, I'm trying to remember exactly actually.
It's been a couple years.
Is it at that point that Rashid is like gonna kill her, or was it because they tried to leave, or was that happening earlier?
They tried to leave. I think they tried to leave twice, because she tried to leave, and she talked to a guy and was like, and essentially said that, I'm not a company. Can you pretend to accompany me? And he's like, yeah, I got you, and then went and reported her.
Yeah.
But I think it was when she tried to leave again that he was.
Yeah, I think it was mostly they wanted to leave, and Tariq was alive, so he felt like Rashid felt like a scorned lover. Although he knew
that Tariq was alive,
or at least knew he wasn't dead in the fashion that had been described.
Okay. I'm probably but yeah.
So
anyways,
assumed, yes, very likely.
He most likely knew that Tariq was alive, and he still said, "Layla, you gotta come to me," because he wanted her, because she was pretty.
Yeah. So,
So he's ticked. And then there's a really pivotal moment where they can either like Miriam has essentially this it all comes to this moment. Like she very easily could have gone one way or the other, but it wasn't even like she didn't hesitate. It was immediately, I'm protecting my family.
Yeah. Well, they're fighting, so they fight back, but that pretty much just makes Rashid more angry, and it's like Rashid's gonna kill Layla. Like he's choking her out and is gonna kill her, and so Miriam makes sure that doesn't happen, and she kills him.
She kills him.
Yeah.
Which was a good part in the story. Like I was like, finally, these like women are free, but. Yeah, but I mean, it's sad that a loss of life had to happen, but it's one was gonna die. Somebody was gonna die, and probably Miriam too, because she was helping.
And so it's kind of like that can't go unnoticed. He actually is expected in the public. He owns a like shoe shop. He's like a shoe repairman, pretty much.
Either way, but that allows Miriam stays behind and allows Layla and Tariq and the son. I don't know if they had the daughter at that point. I don't think they did.
They have them all.
Oh, okay. But it allows them to leave, and it allows them to actually be able to have a happy ending, or at least a chance.
Yeah, they go to Pakistan.
Yeah, but Miriam stays behind to take the fall.
Someone has to, pretty much.
And no matter what, they could claim it's self-defense to the end of all high heavens. But unless like a man is there to witness it, or 3 bystanding women are there to witness it, and even then, it has to be viewed by a man and said by a man. Oh yeah, it was definitely self-defense. Yeah, Miriam is absolutely gonna die.
Yeah, she goes on trial with the Taliban tribunal and Taliban judge, and the judge. It was interesting because the judge pretty much says, "I don't think you're an evil person," and it sounded like pretty much like, I believe you that like he was gonna kill her and stuff like that. But
still, it would have been better if she had died instead.
So she gets executed, simply put, and while
she's there though, she gets a letter from her dad.
No, she doesn't.
She doesn't get the letter. Oh, that's right, she doesn't.
And so she's kind of help uplift some of the other women who are imprisoned, but she gets executed, and then it's Layla, a couple years later, living in Pakistan, that they're like. She's like, I want to go back to Afghanistan. That's been, I guess, it has relative stability because the Taliban has been overthrown by the U.S. government at this point. The book, I don't know, the book was written in 2007, and so this takes place, 2001 invasion of Afghanistan by the American government. And so at some point she's like, okay, let's go back. And it's once she gets back, you get a bit more closure. Like she's like, I want to go to Herat, which is where Miriam grew up. She goes and finds the small like shack that Miriam grew up in, and goes to try to find Miriam's father, who actually had passed away years ago. And one of his sons is there, who had left because her father had left something for Miriam, and it's actually, I think it's touching. It is too little, too late, like she had mentioned earlier. But it was a little bit more closure at the end, essentially.
Like, I legitimately hope that the father died understanding that was never
Well, he did, and he mentioned that he mentions as such in his letter to Miriam. Miriam never got to read the letter. He leaves a couple of other, I would say, fitting gifts for her. But it's mostly, they go back to Kabul, and they are living life. She gets pregnant, and they're like her and all her husband Tariq and the kids are like saying, if it's gonna be a boy, they're like all recommending names, like boy names for the baby, but it pretty much ends by saying like, and no one's recommending girl names because if it's a girl, we already know what the name's gonna be. And I thought that was super touching. On a positive note, in fact, it had a relatively satisfying happy ending. But does it? I mean, I think it's an excellent book. But then you consider the current troubles in Afghanistan. At this time the book was published, and for like the next dozen years or so, Afghanistan is still relatively at peace because it is under American rule. Not that American rule is perfect, of course, right? But it was a lot more free than Taliban rule. And what rule is Afghanistan under now?
Taliban.
The Taliban, again. I kind of want him to write a book about this. Like, same characters, you know, just how it goes. Maybe Aziza would be the main character because she would be a kind of a woman at this point.
I know that we mentioned that, well, at least I mentioned that if, what's his name?
Yes, that one.
The little boy.
Zalmai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If Zalmai was left in that same conditions with Rashid, that he would become Rashid 2.0. But he, with Tariq's influence and his mom, there's a different dynamic with it, and at first it's hard for him, like really hard for him, like this is so different, but he does sort of get better, like just tiniest bit, just within the end of the book.
Oh, Zalmai?
Yeah.
He like
so
stops expecting his father
Yeah.
to come back and stuff like that.
Which is still horrible for a child to understand, like, your dad's dead. Even if he's a piece of crap.
Yeah.
It's your dad. But, anyways, so he very well could change. He could. So there's hope
I think
for
lots
all
of
them.
I mean, I guess that might come back to an argument of nature versus nurture. I think it's a bit of both, if I had to say, but nurture is a huge part of it. And he should be nurtured for most of his life properly, you know, by Layla and Tariq.
Unless, of course, Layla dies in childbirth, which is a legitimate option, as medical facilities are not.
Well, no, so they were worried that she might when it came to Aziza and Zalmai being born, but at this point, you know, NGOs are allowed into the country. There should actually be proper women's hospitals, unlike when it was under Taliban rule. So when they are returned and she was pregnant, it shouldn't be much of a worry. So I think it's, again, the book ends on a relatively happy note. But
For one, at least.
But now
I
it's
was really holding out hope that Miriam would still somehow get a happy ending, because I know that she was probably gonna be like, if I had an option, yeah, I'm okay with this. I'm at peace with this, because she was at peace with it.
Yeah.
But I still want her to actually have a happy ending. Like, maybe she somehow is freed and goes with them, and then actually finds a man that loves her or something. She can never have kids, but she can at least, you know, see her sister's kids. But no, there was nothing.
Yeah, well, I think Rashid dying was the best case scenario. And
It was. And it's also just heartbreaking to me, because she loved her dad the entire story. And she had no idea that he still loved her after all that time, because she doesn't get the letter in time.
He did try to visit her to give her the letter, pretty much, and she wouldn't have him at one point, which I couldn't really blame her, but it was kind of heartbreaking. But either way, a story full of heartbreak.
Full of it.
Super interesting.
Will leave you in tears.
I feel like you get to get a decent understanding of just Afghanistan. Not that it's perfect. Read a history book, you know, on it. And
but I feel like stories like these, it's helpful. Like, if you read a history book, that's good. You should. But even like fictitious narrative based off of historical, like with historical accuracy in it, it brings it so much more home.
Yeah.
Like you actually feel something more towards it. So it bonds you to these characters.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's what you would call. One second. Not quite that, actually. But either way, can highly recommend it if you're good with uncomfortable reads. I love uncomfortable reads. In fact, I feel like they impact me the most, which is kind of what I want when it comes to reading books. And so I was happy with this suggestion, very happy I read it. I think for these videos, and starting with this one, I'm gonna try to put a little portrait of the person who recommended it in there. I don't have one for Steph right now, but at the very least, I had her write some thoughts, like in a little letter that I will have her read for you. That will go in there, and then also a little poem. I don't know, a little bit of creativity. I am not a good poet, spoilers, like you're being warned, but I'll also read the poem for that, and it will take its rightful place. So I'll probably put up some images or whatever while this is reading, so that it's not just staring at us while we read this. But go ahead and read it.
You don't want to stare at my face. It's beautiful.
Yes, it is. But, you know.
No, Afghanistan. The word brings to mind horrible heat, withering away a sun-bleached desert in which children are faced with violence, hunger, and death. Women are treated as animals, and terror groups reign supreme. Whenever anyone speaks of Afghanistan, it's always in connection with war, fear, or anger. When my dad started deploying over there, I was terrified. I understood that it was a dangerous place and feared each time that he'd leave that that farewell moment would be the last time I'd see my dad alive. To the point that to the point of being physically sick for days. But then my dad started telling me more stories that started to ease my worries a slightest bit. He told me I can't read my own handwriting, Shane. This is a problem.
Surprised I can read it.
Oh, I can't. I'm sorry. I get so my hand's sloppy. I'm out of practice. Okay. He told me of the families insisting that they come to their homes for tea or for a meal. Families that had nothing, literally nothing, that lived in poverty I can't imagine, and we're broke, that struggled to feed their little ones but always pressed cans of food into the soldiers' hands to take them with them and expressed gratitude for them being there, keeping them that much safer. My family put care packages together with MREs, toys, clothes, etc. for the families my dad would visit. And he'd tell us how much something like a soccer ball made a child's day feel like 1,000 Christmases put together. This book was an option to read for a world history class, and I was intrigued by my own indirect experiences with Afghanistan that I wanted to learn more and see what life would and see what life would look like through another's eyes, particularly a woman's eyes in the area. So I read it and still have a love-hate relationship with it. Years later.
But it's great, isn't it? Okay. And then
it stays with
it's
you.
actually not sure the poem is very good on
I like
second
it.
reading. But
I like it. It's good.
anyway. We do not earn the sunrise. It breaks with cheers and cries. Its moods may descend upon us, appeal to ashes and the dust. Grace is embraced within the will, through trials ever harder still, equipped for every need, companion of our own creed. Through toil, through endless run, each break hard won. Long nights that wane, clouds that prove insane. Unseen, that sustaining gleam highlights those harsh seams. Irradiating and fierce as you are, signals the breaking dawn is never far. Pluck the nimbus from where it's hung, and grasp your 1,000 splendid suns. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I'll be here. So will the shelf. And Stephanie probably won't be, sorry. It'll be someone else. Hopefully still pretty cool. I guarantee it won't be as cool. I gotta put it on the shelf for the last shelf. See you guys next time. Have a good one.